Hey, what's going on, YouTube? So, I'm back in the kitchen this time. Took some time to set up my computer over here in the prep table. I figure it's a little bit better than holding my phone. Sometimes I use it for notes and whatnot. Um, but today, I want to talk to you guys about different subject, different topic. Um, there we go. Gotta change the focus a little bit. So today I want to talk to you guys about millennials. I want to talk about dominance, and I want to talk about creativity in our society. Um, and I want to focus, on millennials. Um, I want to focus on that age group of individuals that we kind of all know, we've heard of. Heard people talk about these groups before, um, Gen Y and others, Gen Z, right? But today I want to focus on the millennials, because I felt like that was the first group that people really spoke on heavily, in open kind of mediums like social media, like the news. Um, as far as my experience, I feel like when uh, I was growing up, social psychology and um, even foundational, just individual psychology, um, ideas about economics, um, you know, just these different kind of ideas, theories, and concepts on people, groups, and how they function. I felt like kind of was on a rise, you know, kind of was on the rise as I was growing up, and I myself am a millennial. Um, I was born in the '90s, and so and really grew up, you know, throughout the early 2000s, and so forth and so on. Like most of you guys who would identify as millennial, um, we went through that time period of having, a little bit of an analog experience in our early years when we would, um, use devices such as, well, really the lack of certain devices, you know, but, but yeah, but yeah, like, um, and I just, had to refresh myself because, right now we're in the digital space. Obviously, we're, you know, using everything on a screen, but the analog clocks like that used to have, or keep time in school. Usually now I don't see those clocks keep time. Of course, we've got other tools for that, but like, you know, um, or yeah, I guess you could consider some of those analog, depending. But just those times, like before there were a screen, um, and if you were at your grandmother's house, you may have saw clocks even older than the ones at school. Um, but vinyl records, um, some of us had the opportunity to through earlier generations or grandparents or what have you, or just whoever was around, the uncle or you know your aunt, like that might have had and I think for most of us the landline telephones, that was another one on my list. The landline telephones, was a big one that we all had access to, as an analog device, that we used. And I just wanted to bring up some of those things just to, well, remind myself, because I almost forgot, like, man, like, okay, which devices, because now we've made things feel, how they sometimes used to feel, but with all the electronics in them, with a screen attached, and very cool components. But I wanted to start there and bring that up because I feel like there was a spirit to that time that we brought to the internet. The age that we're in now, we walked into as children, and I feel like we brought an energy of spirit or spirituality to the digital, or the internet. And I feel like these are two kind of conflicting, obviously, opposing directions. You could consider them a philosophy, but I really would say they're different directions because in today's time, it's definitely digital. You need to have, your ways about utilizing electronics, electrical devices, if you will. But there also comes a time today, there also comes a time in life, really every day, but you mainly realize that not everything is technology, not everything is electronic. you know when we could we could enumerate a very clear, obvious list, like farming and on, where there are things that are not necessarily electronic. Your tools for even in these areas, of course, you will have electronic tools, but the science to what you're doing isn't really having technology or the electronics as the focal point, but rather the growing, the harvesting, and the goings on of your farm. The same would be true for if you had animals. If we're talking about um, cultivating something either natural or a zoo or research. When we're studying nature and natural things, we have to let things play out. And so we use electronics, of course, to capture what's going on and to record information. But there's always this point where we can just look at nature and see this idea very bare that, okay, although we've stepped into the digital age, the ideas of analog, or the ideas, even though we're not in the analog age, the ideas of analog are ever present, in this universe. I would say in this universe, there are multiple disciplines, and as we go throughout the time, there are shifts in how we as intelligent beings are going to approach things, our problems being those things, right? How we're going to fix and our problems and implement solutions. I think that that's something. I think that that's something that throughout the times we have different ways of approaching. So throughout the times, it's likely to change, the way we go about solving our problems. So, there was a time where we didn't use, we used coal, and now we don't. Or, we decided that we didn't need to use steam power anymore. Or, the various historical examples, the various patterns that we as a society have taken on to progress and to deal with our issues. So I said I want to talk about millennials, I want to talk about dominance, and I want to talk about creativity, right? So I feel like today the dominant form of thought, and it's kind of leading up to this, but the dominant form of thought is to put is to have an exclusionary idea on technology. Like I said, we think everything is exclusive, or that the technology industry is the exclusive placeholder for all these different things, that are going on in life. All these different businesses, and all these different human activities. We would like to think that they're governed solely or exclusively by technology. But in reality, like I said about the universe earlier, the universe is multiple disciplinary. So there's a dominance for sure, but it is not exclusionary. Its dominance does not leave it where it is an exclusion to those things that already exist, those things that already matter, and sometimes those things that already have weight. So we all came into this digital age, got on the internet, and then we realized something. We realized that truth still matters. We realized that you've got to be real, because we still feel, our emotions on the other end. We're just consuming the information through an electronic medium. We're using the screen to tap into a bit of information. We're going to remember the video we just saw. We're going to remember the good times that we had laughing on the phone, or maybe in a video call on the phone. On the other end of the mediums that we're using, there's a human connection, or a human being, right? And a human connection through those two endpoints. If we had the two cups with a string and we're speaking through it, and we're having the same conversation, right? It's the same situation, because on the two ends, and just being silly here, but really, it's the same. The two human beings with human emotion, and that's spirit. That's the spirituality that I feel like we bring as an example. Today I feel like there's a lot of trends that we're familiar with, and there's a lot of desirability to be at the top, have attention, have people's focus, to generate money, and to do things that all deal with attention, that all deal with some of the trends that we see, on the net, and just how people move. I think I might have forgotten to mention competition again, right? So dominance, competition, creativity, or in whichever order, right? But those three really, because the competition factor goes with it. The dominance is really the thought factors that are going through people's mental, and there are a lot of the same programs running. We know that people are, themselves, individuals with their own sort of quirks and things here and there, but the routines and activities that largely govern people's days, we would find there are mostly patterns, and that mostly it is the same. Whether we're looking out at traffic, or we're looking at any large group, any large group sample, especially in, what we would call a modern day society. Um, so from dominance, we look at competition, right? And I find that there's a lot of criticism of people, right? And I find that the criticism is part of the competition, right? Things like insecurities come up, things like maybe even simple opinions, right? Sometimes criticism is warranted, but altogether, I find that it's mostly criticism that is like the root, or the result, with competition being at the root. So people want to compete for attention in this matrix that we're in, where there's a dominant thought pattern with many kinds of thoughts in it, and we know what kind of concepts are pervading us in society, like becoming rich, thoughts like being perfect, whether we express them such as saying, I should be perfect, or visually trying to appear like we are perfect, and that there are no problems, that there are no errors, and that there are no, hardcomings, or, life is really not like that. And we're aware of it, but these are the dominant ideas. And like I said, there's more than one idea. There are many ideas a part of this, right? And it really results in us having a dominance hierarchy, thinking about each other kind of like Lego blocks and how they stack up to see who has more and which is higher, as a litmus test to figure out who's better and who's worse, because the dominant thought is a hierarchy, and a hierarchy is going to have highs, is going to have lows, and the value is going to be seen at the top. The value is going to be seen at the top. And so I know I started this thing talking about, or saying I want to talk about millennials, right? And I am. I still, am on that subject. And I talk about this to say, or I bring all this up, dominance, hierarchy, competition, to talk about now, and criticism, to talk about now the millennial group, the generation of who we are, our group, our age group, and what we faced, the experience, who we are, and just kind of like why I'm saying this, right? I believe that we've had criticism based on these things, and I believe, some of it warranted, some of it maybe not, but we've been a big subject matter, and I feel like that's been because of our contribution, right? So I said dominance, I said competition, and I believe I said creativity, right? So when I talk about the contribution of millennials, of the millennial group, of us, right? And, you guys could expound on this. I myself may expound on this. I may not, because I feel like this point, is pretty evident right? When we really drill down into it, you really think about it, this point is really hard, I feel like, to get around. You know, there's different people in society that are millennials that have reached prominence. You know, you've got one of the biggest ones, Mark Zuckerberg. You've got a couple of others here, Patrick Collison. That's someone in entrepreneurship and fintech. Now I see here we've got Elon Musk, which is a big, another popular one, but listed as a Gen X and millennial cusp, which I might have to do more research on that one. But another Zendaya, the entertainment and actress, Hollywood actress. You know, when we think about the contribution of millennials, you know, and again, I just bring up some names. You could expound on that list, but when you think about us as a group, you effectively are getting the same thing, right? And if I were to extract and compress from that group, it would be the fact that we brought our creative minds to problem solving. We brought our unique ideas to innovative solutions through our businesses and entrepreneurship, or through our projects, whether in movies or symbolism and shows. Our ideas on the world really help change things up for the better. Maybe not always, but I feel like as a whole, in its totality, the contribution that our group, our age group, with its, thought patterns and its beliefs, with our beliefs, as critics would say, I think it did a lot of good. And there could be a debate and an argument there, and maybe an even bigger point there, right? To talk about, our defense and in our defense. But I'm really just here to say in our contribution, and not even in so much my contribution, but in our contribution as a group, I think I add into this myself in what, relative and proportional way that I would, naturally, as you would naturally if you're a millennial, and even if you're not, I feel like creativity is the thing that we offered. And again, whether we've seen that in business, we've seen that in Hollywood, entertainment, acting and music. Also just like on social platforms, the way we've leaned on the use of influence. I would say, even though Gen Z and even Gen Y, the different generations have definitely done their share of activity and milestone achievement, if you will, in that front. But I feel like as the generation kind of coming before, just like Gen X before us, we definitely did our part. Because off the list, Mark Zuckerberg, like, yeah, maybe not as a user, that individual, but you've got plenty other millennials. Again, we could enumerate the list. And I think, as far as us being kids and then walking into the digital age, we definitely, I feel like, started, even with opposing thoughts and criticism from some of the Gen Xers, you are, about what millennials were doing. and about the, value and the time. And, sometimes I feel Gen Z feels like they're the first to hear the criticism. And that's not true. That's not true. We've heard it too, and I feel like the biggest difference in, I guess, progressiveness, and this is kind of like a sidebar, but I'll add it here too, is that, millennials really dealt with, I feel like, more uh, angst and opposement from criticizers, from detractors, from the haters, right? Than Gen Z, because by the time they came around and started having their success online, people started making sense of the fact that you can have success online, and that, to really stand your ground in your value, and be who you are, it takes a lot of the same things that it takes in life. A lot of the things that you need to do in life, the way you need to be in life, a lot of that happens on screen, right? A lot of that happens, that those spiritual things, that spiritual side, that spiritual activity takes place, whether you're physically in the environment to witness it, or it's being captured by one of our great electronic devices. You know, I feel like once the older generation like realized that, and I feel like it took maybe the generation of millennials for people to realize that those, what is it, 4 or 5 years, 7 years, and as that next generation came in, or aged up, right, into adulthood, into age of maturity, and started having their activity and doing the same things on social media, that, there was a great ease. There was, people starting to really ease up because they understood and couldn't deny from the people that were successful, the people that are prominent, the people that do make lists, that, hey, there's truth. And, these truths got realized. Okay, cool. So the good old laptop was dying. I had to plug that in. Set that wire there. Okay. So yeah, what were we saying? We were saying yeah. So that's how I've studied the progression in my mind. Yeah. And yeah, I feel like there was a little bit of charting done in the path for the generations after, and then you've got fourth and so on from Z, and then the creativity, right? I feel like in our times growing up as millennials, we experienced trends like we do now sometimes, but there weren't as many. There weren't as many, and they didn't hit as hard. Uh, Again, there wasn't as widespread acceptance for internet culture and internet activity and even internet capacity. The devices couldn't do as much, and it wasn't. Even the companies didn't have as much of an ability to provide information in their distribution to millions of people as quickly as they do now. Um, Advertising was definitely big, but the way we see advertisements on YouTube, even if it's just regional, or you know maybe a movie trailer. Well, that's a little different because we were watching that back then too. But I would say a movie trailer would have been similar, like would have been the not similar, but would have been an example of like a medium that we would have expected reached a certain distribution level because everyone goes to the theater, they sit down, and they watch this particular movie, and the box office, is pretty much a national thing. So if you live in the country, it that would make sense. There were a few movies, and so the advertising opportunities would have been smaller, right? And so there would have been less room for as many, ads. Today, when we're online, the level of attention that networks can sustain, all the different apps that exist, and the sustainability of them, millions or even thousands actively watching, listening, creates a whole new avenue, a whole new world, I would say, that can be full of advertising, full of, the messages and expression of the sponsors. And that changes the culture of the space when you can say something and a sponsor can come right up under you and maybe pay you to adjust what you said, that sort of thing. Or just having awareness that these are the times. These are the times. And I would say, this is really my thoughts about the progression of the digital age, right? Like, I think within it, there are these hyperloops where people figure out how advertising works. They figure out how entrepreneurship works. They figure out the arts. And we have these hyper frenzies, these trends, where people figure out what it is that people are doing, what it is that, sort of makes success. I feel like when it's real success, it's not so much a trend, but it becomes who a person is. It becomes a core, a character component, or, a core factor, rather than just a trend. When it goes away just as fast as it came, I feel like that's the trend, because it's not what we call a classic. So, yeah, I think that pretty much puts everything in a bag, right? Everything I was saying, and even a little bit extra, right? Millennials, why we're here to bring creativity. We're here to bring ideas. We're here to contribute creativity through the ideas that we bring within these different mediums of human engagement, interaction. We can call that work, but for some of us, these are, maybe careers, and maybe starting out as hobbies, turning into lifestyles and activities we love. But whatever we call it and however we identify it, I feel like this is our mission that we felt since young. And I feel like a lot of us have that mission, not just the millennial group. I feel like all of us, really. But I feel like our age group, in our wisdom, we were here to bring that idea and that message to everybody so that we could embrace it the way we are today. So, I feel like we were successful in that. But it's really, a good fight that still has to continue being fought, because sometimes it's hard to believe in yourself. Sometimes it's hard to really, and I'm saying this on some real stuff. Sometimes it's hard to look at yourself and think like, my idea is gonna change the world. let alone my idea is going to change somebody. But if it could change somebody, when you've had a chance to witness your idea change someone or change something, it really means something to you. It really shows you that there's some power in these words. It really shows you that there's some power in your vision, and that there's some likelihood that all that you are imagining can be pieced together. You know, I think that the generations before us had to deal with a lot of harsh reality, and they had to deal with limitations. They had to deal with, violence. They had to deal with betrayal. There were also good components, loyalty. There were also opportunities. There was also sometimes even abundance. But the harshness of reality and the nature of, today versus before, having as much information as we have, as quickly as we can get to it, with as much storage as your damn phone can hold, or just all of it. The cost of certain things are much lower, even with inflation, right? Being able to utilize Lyft and Uber and Amazon and the quickness of even a UPS. All of it. Versus, these other times where access, and we would have, in those times, if we were in those times, we would have had to acknowledge hard limitation. We would have had to acknowledge hard times. And I think we still do, even today, right? But it's different. And I think that creates a psychology, that creates an understanding, because it's not wrong, that hard times are real, right? Because that's why it's not wrong. That's absolutely the truth. Hard times are hard. And I think the elder generations, what they taught us was that, amongst other things, that I would peg with the age of maturity, with the spirit of growing up, with the spirit of, being on your grown man, being on your grown woman, right? Being on your adult energy. I feel like Gen X and other generations, they brought that, right? I feel like millennials, we brought definitely a young energy. And but I feel like that young energy, that Peter Pan energy, you feel like you can fly, right? Like Peter Pan, you feel like you can fly. I feel like that's what you need for being a visionary, and having a vision, being the sort of person that can see your vision come real. You need that energy. You need to be able to take flight. And so I think that's why our personalities, that's why our, energetic selves, our attachment to just youthful lifestyle and energy, is the way it is, right? And I think we were able to learn a lot from our elder, peer group, age group. And I think the younger folks have, a good chance to learn from us, and that they have learned from us, as that process is ever going and ever growing. So, yeah. No, I got a lot out, but I hope that all makes sense, and that you guys kind of rocking with that. If you're a millennial, you're definitely rocking with it, probably. You know, I don't see you disagreeing with that. You know, if you're not, I'm sure you probably have your points where you agree too. You know, and I'm sure someone could do a video and have their kind of explanation on Gen X, or even baby boomer, right? You go even back and kind of just like giving them their big ups and their praise. I find, since this is my age group, I'm like, I've reflected on it, I've thought about it, and I've grown up in the times listening to people, listening, the news, and like I said, you know, the things we listen to, the mediums that we consume now. Being, alive back then, but just a little less content than compared to today. And we would hear the criticism on folks, that we are kind of similar to today. Folks chasing trends and doing things, but also growing up, myself and ourselves, other people as well, seeing the rise of these different figureheads and these different individuals that have done things that have distinguished themselves, that we can reference, we could point to and say, this person is a millennial, and look at their contribution. This person is a millennial, and look at their contribution. And they believe in the things that we believe. We, are sharing a philosophy, not individuals who are standing in the opposite, to what we believe in our peer group. Not exceptions necessarily to the belief that we have, to the psychology of being able to achieve what it is that we have in our minds, Yeah. So again, I hope you guys like the video. Hopefully that's all summarized well, and something that maybe you guys could build on, or reflect on, and find some good value in. But yeah, I'll be coming back to you guys again, probably indoors again, but I'll probably sit down where I usually am, so we could bring things back into focus a little bit. But I wanted to do something more impromptu and get out the room. Maybe bring you guys to a different room. But yeah, take care. And again, this was on millennials, loosely tying in some different groups in it as well, and kind of how we're situated and pegged, I feel like, by society, and also how we see ourselves, and also just kind of standing on our worth, our praise, and our contribution. So with that, I want to say thanks for watching, YouTube, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.